As we discussed earlier this hour, the Supreme Court has handed President Trump a major victory today by issuing a ruling that limits judges' abilities to rein in his executive orders. Earlier, I spoke with Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz. Hey, Senator, this Supreme Court ruling comes just a few months after you introduced a bill that would prevent some children of immigrants here unlawfully from getting citizenship. Tell us about that bill, and is this ruling having any impact on what you're trying to do legislatively?
Well, the Supreme Court's decision was a landmark decision today. The most important part of the ruling is that the Supreme Court, with a 6-3 vote, reined in the abuse of nationwide so-called universal injunctions. And we've seen the first 5 months of the Trump administration, we have seen an absolute onslaught of Democrat state attorneys general and left-wing activist groups going and seeking radical activist single district judges who one after the other have been issuing nationwide injunctions. And I'll tell you, Scott, it's amazing. In the first 5 months of this year, there have been more nationwide injunctions issued against President Trump than there were in the entirety of the 20th century. There have been more in the last 5 months than there were in all 8 years of President George W. Bush, all 8 years of President Barack Obama, and all 4 years of Joe Biden. And the Supreme Court today said enough is enough. This is not legal. A district judge can decide under the Constitution a case or controversy before them and can issue a ruling that is binding to the parties, but one judge in Massachusetts or California doesn't have the power to bind all 330 million Americans. That's a real victory for democracy, because you were getting rogue judges putting their own policy preferences in front of the agenda that President Trump was elected to implement and to carry out the will of the people.
I do want to ask you about injunctions in a moment, but about your bill.
Yeah.
To legislatively change birthright citizenship. You still press forward with that?
Absolutely. And listen, birthright citizenship is a policy that doesn't make any sense. And what we have right now is it is a magnet for illegal immigration. The current law has been that if someone crosses over here illegally and they have a baby, that baby is automatically a U.S. citizen. That's not the case in most countries on earth, and it's bad policy. We should not be incentivizing people to break the law. And so I have long supported ending that policy, and ending that policy through whatever vehicle you need. There are some legal scholars who argue you need a constitutional amendment. There are others who say you can do it through legislation. President Trump is trying to do it through executive order. Through whichever vehicle you use, I think the policy is not a policy that makes sense, and so it should be changed. You
mentioned the number of injunctions, the historic number of injunctions this year. And the critics of the administration say that maybe because the president has tried so many new, novel, unprecedented things. Do you have any concerns, as Justice Sotomayor said in her dissent, that a Democratic president could come in, send agents to everybody's door, take their guns, and say, you can't stop me with an injunction, that a Democratic president in the future is now newly in power?
So let's be clear. We had 4 years of Joe Biden, who was utterly lawless. If you look at what he did on the southern border, he said, I don't care what federal immigration law is. I'm going to let everyone come into this country illegally. I'm going to let murderers and rapists and Venezuelan gang members come into this country illegally. If you look at Joe Biden, he also issued an order that purported to forgive over $1 trillion of student loans. He had no legal authority to do that, and the Supreme Court struck it down. He issued another order that purported to force millions of Americans to take a COVID vaccine, even if they chose not to. He had no authority to do that. That was struck down. So when it comes to abuse of power, there's never been an administration that has abused power at the level that Joe Biden did. And I'll say that you started by saying, well, gosh, the Democrats say there have been so many injunctions just because Trump is so bad. I'll point out that of these nationwide injunctions, 85% of them have come from 5 districts. The Democrats know exactly who they're going to. They're going to the radicals on the bench that Joe Biden put there, that Barack Obama put there, and they were seeking people who were partisan activists, not judges who will follow the law. And I'm very glad the Supreme Court, in a clear 6-3 decision, said this is an abuse of power, and we're going to respect the will of the democratically elected political officers and not unelected judges trying to set policy for the entire country.
You therefore think Republicans will be less likely to go to that northern district of Texas in your home state where they think that they have the best chance to win cases?
Well, listen, I will say the federal judges in Texas, I think, are the finest federal judges in the country. I played a very active part in helping President Trump nominate and confirm those judges. And I think in many ways that's the most significant legacy of the first Trump term, are constitutionalists on the court. But Scott, I will say there's a real difference. When Democrats put people on the court, they're looking for partisan activists who will implement their own preferred public policy. When Republicans are doing it, I'm not looking for a right-wing activist to mandate right-wing policy outcomes. I want a judge who will follow the law. I want a judge who will follow the Constitution. That is something, unfortunately, Democrats have long set aside in any intent to defend the First Amendment, defend the Second Amendment, defend religious liberty. Those are not priorities for judges nominated by Democrats. Instead, they're interested in partisan outcomes. That's why you've seen so many of these nationwide injunctions.
I have time for one more question, Senator. The author of this decision we're talking about is Justice Coney Barrett.
Yeah.
What do you make of how she's doing so far?
Look, I think this decision was a landmark decision. It is by far the most consequential decision Justice Barrett has written. I thought this would be the outcome of this case. I do a podcast every week called Verdict with Ted Cruz. This is the outcome I predicted. But I will say this, the opinion was stronger and clearer than I had anticipated. It's a real victory. And I think Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote a dissent that was all but unhinged. And I think that really showed the contrast between judges and justices who are following the law versus judges and justices that are seeking a partisan outcome.
The Russell Senate building with us, Senator Ted Cruz. Thank you.
Thank you.